The winter light was fading over London when Catherine, Princess of Wales, walked into the private sitting room at Clarence House. She had spent the morning with survivors of the Holocaust, listening to their stories, holding their hands, promising to return. Her body was still recovering from the grueling months of chemotherapy, and the cancer cells had only recently been declared cleared from her system. But this visit was different. This visit was with Camilla, the queen consort, the woman who had once whispered poison into the ear of a king about Catherine's bloodline, the woman who had allegedly orchestrated the most humiliating breakup of Catherine's young life. The room was decorated in soft greens and golds, the kind of effortless elegance that only centuries of inherited wealth could produce. That Catherine sat straight-backed on the silk settee, her hands folded in her lap, her wedding ring catching the lamplight. Across from her, Camilla poured tea with steady hands, the diamond brooch at her collar glittering with every small movement. On the surface, it was a perfectly ordinary afternoon between two royal women. But beneath the china cups and polite smiles lay a history that neither of them had ever spoken aloud. Until now. Catherine was not supposed to know the full extent of what Camilla had done. The biographies, the leaked palace briefings, the carefully sourced newspaper columns, those were for the public, for the historians, for the gossip columnists who made their living dissecting the royal family's private wars. Inside the family, the code of Omerta was absolute. You did not accuse. You did not confront. You smiled. You curtsied. You carried on. Catherine had carried on for nearly 2 decades. She had smiled at Camilla through engagement announcements, through wedding rehearsals, through the births of 3 children, through Christmas lunches at Sandringham, where the tension was thick enough to choke on. She had kept her counsel and kept her peace. But the cancer had changed something. When you have looked at your own mortality in the face, when you have sat in a hospital chair and watched poison drip into your veins to save your own life, the fear of upsetting the delicate balance of royal egos begins to seem rather trivial. Catherine had spent her 20s and 30s being careful with her words, careful with her loyalties, careful not to give Camilla any ammunition to use against her. She had watched William navigate the impossible terrain of loving a father who had chosen his mistress over his mother's memory. She had watched the Queen navigate the equally impossible task of keeping the monarchy intact while her son installed his controversial wife in the heart of the institution. Now Catherine was done being careful. She set down her teacup with a soft clink. Camilla looked up, surprised by the deliberate placement. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken history. Catherine's voice, when she finally spoke, was not loud. It was not angry. It was the calm, steady voice of a woman who had survived everything thrown at her and was no longer afraid of what remained. I know about 1999, Catherine said quietly. I know about the photographers in the alley. I know about the man you hired to make the public believe it was an accident. Camilla's hand paused over the teapot. For a fraction of a second, her composed mask flickered. Then she continued pouring, her movements deliberate and unhurried. That was a very long time ago, she said. Another century, really. It was the beginning, Catherine replied. The beginning of everything. The beginning of making the public forget what had happened to Diana. The beginning of making yourselves the victims instead of the architects. You didn't just want to be with Charles. You wanted to rewrite history. You wanted to erase the woman who had been in your way. Camilla set down the teapot. Her knuckles were white. You cannot possibly understand what it was like, she said. The press hunted me like an animal. I couldn't leave my home for months, and I was the most hated woman in Britain. You were the most hated woman in Britain because you had spent years conducting an affair with a married man whose wife was beloved by the entire world, Catherine said, her tone still measured, still calm. And when that wife died in a tunnel in Paris, you did not disappear. You did not retreat into obscurity out of respect for the grieving children who had just lost their mother. You hired a PR firm. You staged a photo call in a dark alley with 200 photographers who just happened to be waiting there. You built your future on the grave of a woman who could no longer defend herself. The words hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. Camilla's face had drained of color. For years, she had carefully curated her image as the misunderstood woman, the long-suffering partner, and the victim of cruel public opinion. No one in the family had ever laid the truth at her feet so directly, so completely. Even the Queen, for all her cool disdain, had never spoken of Diana's death in connection with Camilla's rise. It was the great unspoken truth at the heart of the modern monarchy, the ghost that sat at every family gathering, the silence that echoed through every state banquet. Catherine leaned forward slightly. "I'm not here to punish you," she said. "I'm not here to demand an apology or a confession or a public reckoning. I'm here because I need you to understand something. I know everything. I have always known. And I have chosen, every single day for the past 18 years, to treat you with courtesy and respect, despite what you tried to do to me." Camilla's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. Here it was, and the moment she had surely dreaded, but perhaps always expected. The reckoning that had been deferred for so long, now arriving in the voice of the woman she had once dismissed as unworthy. "You wanted William to break up with me in 2007, Catherine continued. You told Charles to tell his son that I was holding him back, that I wasn't suitable, that my mother was a flight attendant and my ancestors worked in coal mines. You thought you could protect the future of the monarchy from a middle-class girl with ambitious parents. You thought you could keep the throne safe from people like us." Camilla's voice was barely a whisper. "That was a misunderstanding." "It was not a misunderstanding," Catherine said. "It was a campaign. You leaked stories about my mother chewing gum. You spread rumors about my uncle's behavior. You tried to paint my entire family as vulgar social climbers who were embarrassing the crown, and when William and I briefly separated, you celebrated. You thought you had won." The silence that followed was absolute. Outside, the London evening had turned fully dark, the lights of the city glittering through the tall windows. Inside, two women sat across from each other, separated by a coffee table and 18 years of carefully suppressed conflict. "I was wrong," Camilla said finally. The words seemed to cost her physical effort. "I was wrong about you, and I was wrong about your family." Catherine did not soften. She had waited too long, endured too much, to be moved by a single sentence of belated acknowledgement. "You were wrong about a great many things," she said, "but the past is the past. I'm not interested in your guilt or your regrets. I'm interested in what happens next." Camilla looked at her warily. "What do you want?" Catherine's gaze was steady, unwavering. "I want you to stop," she said. "I want you to stop the subtle campaigns, the anonymous briefings, the careful whispers in Charles's ear about who is worthy and who is not. I want you to stop treating my mother as a rival and my children as prizes to be fought over. I want you to accept, fully and finally, that I am not going anywhere. I am the future queen of this realm, and my children will sit on this throne long after both of us are dust. You cannot change that. You cannot undermine it. You cannot whisper it away with clever words to sympathetic journalists." Camilla sat perfectly still. The feathers on her brooch trembled slightly with her breathing. And Catherine added, her voice dropping to something just above a whisper. "I want you to acknowledge what you did to Diana. Not to me, not publicly, but to yourself. I want you to stop pretending that you were simply a woman who fell in love with the wrong man. You were a woman who pursued a married man for years, who refused to step aside, who attended social functions knowing that his wife was suffering in the shadows. You were a woman who accepted a PR campaign built on the ashes of a tragedy. You cannot undo any of that, but you can stop pretending it didn't happen." The tears that slipped down Camilla's face were silent, unaccompanied by sobs or apologies. She did not wipe them away. They fell onto her hands, onto the fabric of her dress, onto the elaborate brooch that had once belonged to the Queen Mother. I never meant for her to die," Camilla whispered. "I never wished her harm. I wanted him. I had always wanted him. Since I was 23 years old, and he was the most beautiful man I had ever seen. She had everything, her beauty, her youth, her public adoration. I only wanted him." Catherine did not reach out to comfort her, but she also did not look away. "You cannot build a future on a foundation of denial," she said. "I know this because I have spent the past year facing my own mortality. You cannot outrun the truth forever. It will find you in the end." The door to the sitting room opened softly. A palace aide appeared, murmuring something about the king's schedule. Camilla nodded, her composure slowly reassembling itself. She dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, adjusted her collar, straightened her spine. Now, by the time the aide withdrew, the tears had been wiped away, the mask restored. But something had shifted. Catherine could see it in the way Camilla avoided her gaze, in the slight tremor of her hands, in the unusually long pause before she spoke. "Thank you for coming," Camilla said formally. "It was kind of you to visit." Catherine rose, smoothing her skirt. "I didn't come here to be kind," she said. "I came here to be honest. There's a difference." She walked toward the door, then paused with her hand on the handle. She turned back, and for a moment the mask slipped, revealing something softer beneath. "I know that Charles loves you," she said. "I know that you have made him happy in ways Diana never could. I am not blind to that. But his happiness cannot come at the expense of truth. And not anymore." She left Camilla sitting alone in the lamplight, surrounded by silk and silver and centuries of royal history, the weight of her choices finally settling fully upon her shoulders. The king was not supposed to eavesdrop. 60 years of royal training had taught him to maintain perfect composure, to appear unaware of conversations not explicitly directed at him, to glide through corridors and drawing rooms with the serene detachment of a man who had never needed to strain for information. But on this particular evening, Charles found himself standing motionless in the small antechamber adjoining his wife's private sitting room, his hand frozen on the door handle, his breathing deliberately shallow. He had not intended to listen. And he had merely been walking from his study to his dressing room when he heard Catherine's voice through the partially open door. Not her public voice, the warm, diplomatic tone she deployed at charity galas and royal tours, but something else entirely. Something he had never heard from her in nearly 2 decades of family gatherings. Something that made his chest tighten and his mouth go dry. He heard her speak of 1999. He heard her speak of Diana. He heard her speak of the breakup in 2007, the whispered campaign against Carol Middleton, the calculated leaks and the strategic whispers. And he heard Camilla cry. Charles had witnessed his wife's tears only a handful of times in their 50-year entanglement. She had not cried when Diana confronted her at a mutual friend's party, Now, she had not cried when the tabloids called her a Rottweiler and a homewrecker. She had not cried when her own children were mocked in the press or when the Queen refused to attend their wedding. Camilla's tears were reserved for private moments of profound exhaustion, moments when the weight of public hatred became briefly unbearable. He had held her through those moments, murmuring reassurances, promising that one day the world would understand. He had never heard her cry like this. When Catherine finally departed, gliding past the antechamber door with no indication that she knew he was there, Charles remained frozen in place for a long time. His back ached. It always ached. A persistent companion from decades of polo injuries and ceremonial standing. But he did not move. He stared at the wall, and at the familiar portrait of his grandmother, Queen Mary, and tried to reconcile the woman who had just spoken in his wife's sitting room with the daughter-in-law he thought he knew. He had always considered Catherine a pleasant addition to the family. Pretty, certainly. Graceful, undoubtedly. A devoted mother, an efficient royal, a steadying influence on his sometimes mercurial eldest son. He had approved of her wedding dress, admired her skill with foreign dignitaries, appreciated the way she handled the press with poise beyond her years. But he had never, in truth, taken her seriously as a force to be reckoned with. She was so quiet, so careful, so determined to avoid controversy. She never pushed back during family discussions, never challenged his opinions on estate management or charitable priorities, and never seemed to harbor any ambitions beyond supporting her husband and raising their children. He had mistaken her patience for passivity, her discretion for docility. He had assumed that the woman who smiled through every Christmas photo shoot and waved from every royal balcony was exactly what she appeared to be, a lovely, dutiful consort who had been fortunate enough to marry a future king. He had been spectacularly wrong. That night, Charles lay awake in his separate bedroom. The arrangement had been his doctor's recommendation for his back, but he had come to appreciate the privacy it afforded, and replayed Catherine's words in his mind. You cannot build a future on a foundation of denial. He thought of his mother, Queen Elizabeth, who had spent 70 years refusing to explain or complain, maintaining the mystique of monarchy through absolute silence. He thought of his father, Prince Philip, who had suppressed his own desires so completely that even his closest aides never knew his true feelings. He thought of himself, 60 years of waiting, 60 years of suppressing his love for Camilla, 60 years of pretending that his marriage to Diana was functional when everyone could see it was a disaster. Denial was not merely a royal coping mechanism, it was the very foundation upon which the modern monarchy had been built. Without denial, how could the family gather at Balmoral each summer, smiling at cameras, pretending that the divorces and betrayals and whispered scandals had never happened? Without denial, how could Charles stand beside the woman he loved while his ex-wife's ghost hovered over every public engagement? And without denial, how could any of them face the cameras, the historians, the millions of subjects who still believed in the fairy tale? But Catherine was right. Denial had a cost, and that cost was now being tallied in the face of a woman who had waited 18 years to speak the truth. The following morning, Charles found his way to the small breakfast room where Catherine was alone, reading a report from one of her patronages. She looked up as he entered, her expression unreadable. There was no guilt there, no anxiety, no indication that she regretted a single word spoken the previous evening. "May I join you?" Charles asked. His voice sounded strange to his own ears, less formal, less performative. "Of course," Catherine said. She set down her reading glasses and folded her hands on the tablecloth. At the morning light caught the diamond in her engagement ring, the same ring that had once belonged to his mother, and Charles felt a sudden, unexpected pang of something like grief. He sat down heavily, A footman appeared with coffee, and Charles waved him away impatiently. When they were alone, he stared at his daughter-in-law for a long moment, searching for the right words. "I heard," he said finally. "Yesterday, I was in the antechamber." Catherine's expression did not change. "I know," she said. "I saw your shadow under the door." Charles blinked. Of course she had known. Of course she had continued speaking anyway, delivering her carefully constructed truths to both Camilla and the hidden audience beyond. He had underestimated her again. "You were very harsh," he said. It was not an accusation. It was an observation, almost wondering. "I was honest," Catherine replied. "There is a difference." The same words she had spoken to Camilla. Charles turned them over in his mind, examining them from every angle. "Why now?" he asked. "After all these years, why choose this moment to confront her?" Catherine was quiet for a moment, her gaze distant. When she spoke, her voice was soft but utterly steady. "Because I nearly died," she said. "Because I spent months lying in a hospital bed, watching poison drip into my veins, wondering if I would live to see my children grow up. And in those long, quiet hours, I thought about what I would leave behind. Not titles or jewelry or palaces, not the legacy of a dutiful royal wife. I thought about the things I had never said, the truths I had swallowed, the anger I had suppressed to keep the peace. Oh, and I realized that I did not want to die with that poison still inside me." Charles felt his throat tighten. He thought of his own mortality, the relentless march of time that had transformed him from a young prince to an aging king. He thought of his mother, serene in death, her secrets carried with her to the grave. He thought of Diana, silenced forever in a Paris tunnel, her voice preserved only in recordings and interviews and the memories of those who had loved her. "I loved her, you know," he said quietly. "Camilla. I loved her from the moment I met her, and I have spent 50 years defending that love against everyone who said it was wrong." "I know," Catherine said, "and I am not here to judge your love. But love does not excuse everything. Love does not erase the pain you caused. Our love does not give you permission to build your happiness on someone else's suffering." Charles looked down at his hands, the knuckles swollen with age, the signet ring heavy on his finger. "What do you want me to say?" he asked. "That I regret my marriage to Diana. I have regretted it every day since the ceremony. That I wish I had been a better husband. I wish that more than you can possibly imagine, that I would change the past if I could. I would change so many things that the man I was would be unrecognizable to the man I am now." "I don't want you to say anything," Catherine said. "I don't want apologies or confessions or dramatic gestures. I want you to see me. Not as William's wife or George's mother or the future queen. I want you to see me as a woman who has spent 18 years proving herself to a family that never wanted her. And I want you to stop pretending that I am somehow less worthy because my ancestors worked with their hands instead of sitting on thrones." Charles felt the weight of her words settle over him like a ceremonial robe, heavy and inescapable. He thought of his own children, William and Harry, and how he had failed them both in different ways. He thought of his grandchildren, George and Charlotte and Louis, and the world they would inherit. He thought of Camilla, alone in her sitting room, her carefully constructed defenses finally breached. "I have been very foolish," he said slowly, "for a very long time." Catherine did not disagree. She also did not gloat. She simply nodded, and accepting his acknowledgement as a fact, rather than a victory. "I will try to do better," Charles said. The words felt inadequate, almost absurdly so, but they were also the truest words he had spoken in years. "I cannot undo the past. I cannot bring back the people I have hurt or erase the pain I have caused, but I can try to be better. Going forward. Catherine studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she smiled. It was not a warm smile, not yet, perhaps not ever, but it was genuine. That is all any of us can do, she said. Try. The letter arrived at Anmer Hall on a Tuesday afternoon, delivered by royal courier in a cream envelope, sealed with the Parker Bowles family crest. Catherine recognized the handwriting immediately, elegant, slightly old-fashioned, and the loops and flourishes of a woman educated in a time when penmanship was still considered a mark of character. She carried the envelope to her private sitting room, away from the noise of children playing and staff preparing dinner, and opened it with hands that were perfectly steady. Dear Catherine, I have spent the past 3 weeks thinking about our conversation. I have thought of little else, in truth. I have replayed your words so many times that I have memorized them, turned them over in my mind like smooth stones collected from a beach, examined them from every possible angle in the hope of finding some flaw, some exaggeration, some injustice that would allow me to dismiss them. I have found none. You were right. About all of it. I have spent 30 years constructing a version of my life that allowed me to sleep at night. And in this version, I was simply a woman who loved a man, trapped in an unhappy marriage of my own, seeking comfort where I could find it. In this version, Diana was not my victim, but my rival, equally matched, equally flawed, equally responsible for the catastrophe of her marriage. In this version, the public hatred I endured was undeserved, the product of media manipulation and Diana's superior skill at courting public sympathy. In this version, I was not the villain. I was the misunderstood heroine, finally rewarded for her patience and devotion. It was a lie. I do not know if I can undo 30 years of self-deception. I do not know if I can become the kind of woman who acknowledges her faults rather than justifies them. I do not know if I can look at the woman in the mirror and see someone other than the victim I have trained myself to believe I was. But I am going to try. Your words have made it impossible for me to do otherwise. I owe you an apology. Not for 1999. Although I'm sorry for the deception and the manipulation and the callousness of building my future on the ashes of a tragedy. Not for 2007, although I am deeply, genuinely ashamed of my attempts to end your relationship with William. I owe you an apology for something far more fundamental. I underestimated you. I dismissed you. I looked at your youth, your beauty, your middle-class background, and I saw only what you lacked. I did not see your strength, your integrity, your fierce determination. I did not see that you were, in every way that matters, my superior. You will be a great queen. Not because of your bloodline or your marriage or the accidents of birth that have shaped your destiny. You will be a great queen because you understand something that I have spent a lifetime avoiding. That power without honesty is merely tyranny dressed in jewels. You speak truth, even when it is painful. You confront reality, even when it is ugly. You demand accountability, even from those who have spent their lives believing themselves above it. I cannot promise that I will become the woman you deserve to have as an ally. Old habits are deeply entrenched, and the defenses I have built around my ego are formidable. But I can promise that I will try. I can promise that I will no longer work against you, in public or in private. I can promise that I will treat your mother with the respect she has always deserved, and that I will never again question your place in this family. You have my word. I know that my word may not mean much to you, given our history. But it is all I have to offer, and I offer it freely. Yours. Camilla Catherine read the letter twice, then a third time. She noted the careful phrasing, the absence of self-pity, the genuine humility in the final paragraphs. She also noted what was not there: any mention of Diana. Camilla had acknowledged her lies about Catherine, her campaign against the Middletons, her manipulation of Charles and William. But she had not spoken the name of the woman whose death had paved the way for her ascension. That reckoning, Catherine understood, was still to come. Perhaps it would never come fully. Perhaps some truths were too painful to be confronted all at once. But this was a start. More than Catherine had expected, more than she had dared to hope for. She folded the letter carefully and slid it into the drawer of her writing desk, next to the photographs of her children and the small, worn Bible her grandmother had given her on her wedding day. That evening, she told William about the letter. They sat in the cozy sitting room at Anmer Hall, a fire crackling in the hearth, their children asleep upstairs. William listened in silence, his expression shifting from disbelief to wariness to something softer, more complicated. "Do you believe her?" he asked finally. Catherine considered the question carefully. "I believe she believes herself," she said. "Whether she can sustain that belief, as whether she can translate it into genuine change, that remains to be seen. But I think she is telling the truth about trying." William stared into the fire. His face, in the flickering light, looked suddenly young, almost boyish. Catherine remembered the first time she had seen him, shy and awkward at St. Andrew's, spilling wine on his own shirt when she curtsied too enthusiastically. She remembered the phone call in 2007, his voice breaking as he told her it wasn't working. He wasn't ready. He needed space. She remembered the pain of those weeks, the humiliation of being publicly discarded, the desperate hope that her mother had encouraged her to maintain. "She almost destroyed us," William said quietly. "If I had listened to my father, if I had let Camilla's whispers convince me that I was too young, that you weren't suitable, that I should wait for someone more appropriate, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't have George, Charlotte, Louis. We wouldn't have this life." "But you didn't listen," Catherine said. "You came back. You chose me. You have chosen me every day since then." William reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. "I will always choose you," he said. "No matter what Camilla does or says, no matter how many letters she writes or apologies she offers, you are my choice. My only choice." Catherine squeezed his hand. "I know," she said. "That is why I could confront her, not because I am brave or noble or particularly forgiving, because I know that nothing she says or does can take you away from me. You gave me that security, William. You gave me the foundation upon which I could build my own strength." They sat in silence for a long time, watching the fire consume the logs, the flames dancing and shifting. Outside, the Norfolk night was quiet, the fields stretching dark and peaceful toward the sea. "What do we do now?" William asked. Catherine leaned her head against his shoulder. "We carry on," she said. "We raise our children. We serve our country. We try to be better than we were yesterday. That is all anyone can do." The months that followed were not transformed overnight. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no public embrace, no carefully staged photograph of Catherine and Camilla walking together through the palace gardens. The royal family does not operate in dramatic gestures. It operates in incremental shifts, subtle realignments, and the gradual accumulation of small kindnesses that eventually reshape the landscape of relationships. But there were changes, visible to those who knew where to look. At the Easter Sunday service at St. George's Chapel, Catherine and Camilla walked side by side from the car to the entrance, their conversation soft but sustained. No photographer captured the moment. The press was kept at the usual distance, and the images that appeared in Monday's newspapers showed only two women in matching pastel coats, heads inclined toward each other. But palace insiders noted that it was Camilla who had requested the arrangement. Camilla who had suggested they arrive together, Camilla who had waited at the car door for Catherine to join her. At the Chelsea Flower Show, Catherine's mother, Carol, was photographed in conversation with the Queen Consort, as both women smiling genuinely as they admired a display of English roses. No awkwardness, no stiffness, no subtle signs of animosity. A few weeks later, Camilla sent Carol a handwritten note praising her work with a children's literacy charity. Carol framed it and hung it in her study. When Princess Charlotte celebrated her 9th birthday, the guest list included Camilla's grandchildren from her first marriage. The children played together in the gardens of Kensington Palace, chasing each other through the flower beds and squealing with delight at the magician's tricks. Camilla watched from a wrought iron bench, and when Catherine brought her a cup of tea, she looked up with something like gratitude in her eyes. And then, in the soft twilight of a summer evening at Balmoral, the final reckoning arrived. As Catherine was walking alone along the River Dee, the water rushing over ancient stones in that particular Scottish cadence she had come to love. The heather was blooming on the hillsides, purple and gold in the fading light. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Camilla, dressed in walking boots and a waxed jacket, her cheeks flushed from exertion. "May I join you?" Camilla asked. Her voice was tentative, almost shy, a tone Catherine had never heard from her before. "Of course," Catherine said. They walked together in silence for a few minutes, the only sound the river and the wind and the distant bleating of sheep. "I have been thinking about what you said," Camilla began slowly. "About Diana. About the things I have never acknowledged, even to myself." Catherine did not speak. She simply walked, and her gaze fixed on the path ahead. "I was jealous of her," Camilla continued. "Not because she was beautiful, although she was, not because the world adored her, although it did. I was jealous because she had something I never could. She was Charles's wife. She had the title, the position, the legitimacy. I had been his lover for years, but I was always in the shadows, always the other woman, always waiting for stolen moments and secret phone calls and holidays arranged to avoid detection." She paused, her breath catching slightly. "When she died, I felt, I don't know how to describe it. Relief at first, and then guilt so overwhelming I thought it would crush me. And then, over time, I convinced myself that her death was not my fault. I had not driven the car. I had not commanded the paparazzi. I had not caused the crash. I was simply a woman who loved a man. And that love was not a crime." "But it was," Catherine said softly. "Not the love itself, but the denial, the refusal to acknowledge that your happiness was built on her pain, the campaign to erase her memory and rewrite history. That was a crime. Not a legal crime, perhaps, but a crime against truth, against her children, against the woman herself who could no longer defend herself." Camilla nodded slowly. Her face was streaked with tears, but she did not wipe them away. "I know that now," she whispered. "I have known it, somewhere deep inside, for 27 years. I just could not bear to look at it directly. It was easier to blame her, to blame the press, to blame Charles for marrying her in the first place. Anyone but myself." They had stopped walking now, standing together on the riverbank as the light continued to fade. Catherine looked at the woman beside her, not the queen consort, not the former mistress, not the villain of countless tabloid headlines. Just a woman, aging and tired, and finally, perhaps, ready to confront the truth. "I don't need you to flagellate yourself publicly," Catherine said. "I don't need a televised confession or a memorial foundation in Diana's name. Those gestures would be for public consumption, not genuine atonement. What I need, what William needs, what Harry needs, what Diana's memory needs, is for you to simply stop running from the truth, to acknowledge, at least to yourself, what you did and what it cost." Camilla was silent for a long moment. The river rushed past them, indifferent and eternal. Then slowly she spoke. "Oh, I was the other woman," she said. "For years. I knew he was married. I knew she was young and vulnerable and desperately in love with him. I knew that every stolen afternoon, every secret phone call, every carefully arranged coincidence was a betrayal of her trust and her dignity. I didn't care. I told myself that she was unstable, that she was unsuited to royal life, that their marriage was a mistake from the beginning, and I was simply correcting that mistake. But that was not the truth. The truth is that I wanted him, and I did not care what it cost anyone else." Her voice broke on the final words. Catherine reached out and took her hand. It was cold and trembling. "I am sorry," Camilla whispered. "I am so sorry. I cannot undo what I did. I cannot bring her back. I cannot give her sons the mother they lost or give the world the queen she would have become. But I am sorry, truly deeply sorry, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that sorrow." Catherine held her hand as the darkness gathered around them, as the first stars appeared in the Scottish sky, as the river continued its ancient journey toward the sea. She did not forgive Camilla. Forgiveness was not hers to grant, not for the pain inflicted on Diana and her children. But she acknowledged the apology. She acknowledged the effort. She acknowledged that a woman who had spent 30 years running from the truth was finally, at long last, turning to face it. And that, she understood, was enough for now. When they walked back to the castle together, their footsteps synchronized on the gravel path. The king was watching from the drawing-room window. He saw his wife and his daughter-in-law walking side by side, their heads bent toward each other in quiet conversation. He saw Catherine release Camilla's hand as they approached the door. He saw Camilla's face, still streaked with tears, but somehow lighter, as if a great weight had finally been lifted. He did not know what had passed between them. He did not ask. Some truths, he understood now, were not his to demand. But he knew with a certainty that settled deep in his aging bones that something fundamental had shifted. Not forgiveness, perhaps. Not reconciliation, not yet. But honesty. Finally, after all these years, honesty. And in a family built on secrets and silences and carefully maintained illusions, that was the greatest revolution of all.